we'd like to welcome you here tonight, and we'd like to welcome Jerry Whitney from Milford, Nebraska. First, we'll back up and we'll establish that our date is May 9th, 2018. And actually, we're starting part 2 of our interview. And Jerry just has invaluable information on how the road system was started in Nebraska, and most importantly in our little part of the world in Seward County. We are going to start. Jerry had some great information about how this all started in the very beginning, and we want to be sure and establish the preface of how this all commenced. Jerry?
All right, we would be talking last time about trails to roads, and to start that out, I will say that because of the American Revolution, the state of New York and other states did not have monies, and they needed some way to reward the veterans that fought in the Revolutionary War. But these states did have tremendous amounts of land. In fact is, the land was laid out clear to the West Coast in New York. In Massachusetts, they both went clear all the way to the West Coast. So there was plenty of land. There was an individual in New York that contrived the idea of going from the longitude and latitudes to the townships and range and sections as a way to divide that up, and so they could identify where this soldier would receive his land. And so there was a territory in the Herkimer County of New York that was to be divided up and given to the soldiers. Officers got more than the privates, and so on. So then, to bring that to the current time and why we're talking about it today, we will be talking more about roads to highways, and this measurement system of townships and range and section was used again here. That was used by the surveyors, and the surveying started in 1854 to divide the land of the Louisiana Purchase into the Nebraska and into the Kansas territories. That was located by the surveyor. He put his markers down, and from that, we call that the 6th principal meridian. And that is how we would find our land up here. And so we are like, and I won't have it exact, but like 9, 3, and 1. And so what you would be saying that you were 9 townships north and 3 ranges east of the principal meridian. From that, then you would take that section of ground and divide it on into lots, and you would have it into quarters. So now then, we'll bring this up to about a time of 1879, and since we had already formed a territory here in 1854, as I said, then we became a state in 67. Okay, I can't get my numbers right. It is 67, and so then in 1879, they decided that the system that New York had devised there for the divisions of land would be appropriate, and we would put roads on section lines. So this is where we have the section lines. It becomes a little more complicated than that because the section line would come on the edge of the county. So you would have one Hamilton on one side, Seward on the other side, that type of thing. So if your road was half on one county and half on the other county, I want you to kind of keep that in your mind, because that made the difference in how and who paid for this road. And so that was one of the incidences there. And so then, since they in 1879 said, okay, we'll put roads on the section lines, and that was all well and good, but nothing really happened. The counties didn't have the monies.
They didn't have the funding.
They did not have the funding, so the counties, they didn't know what to do. The state said that the road system was up to the counties. They tried the different labor systems where a man would spend 2 days a week building roads, and that would get him out of the tax thing, and that did not work well. They tried to each man would put up $3, but then it cost $5 to collect the $3, and that didn't work. So the system, and you need to remember this when you read history and look at maps, because the laws might have been introduced on a particular date, but the effectiveness did not take place in time, sometimes more than a decade later before it really took place. Your maps is another thing that, should you get into the county records and state records and so on, and look at the maps, and you will become confused at times, because here it will be drawn on to the map either roads or where the river was, and yet it really wasn't there at that time as when the map was made. The map will say it was made in such and such a date, but there was no road at that time. It was at a later date before the road got there. And this type of thing. So you have to be careful, and this happens very often. I will just mention, because it comes up later, the RFD, when the federal government in the postal system said we will have free mail. Before this, if you was going to get postal mail, you had to come to a town that had been designated with a post office and call for your mail. But
rural free delivery.
Rural free delivery. Yes. A lot of times, I've heard it rural farm delivery. That's not correct, but that's what it served mostly. So it's free delivery. 1896. And those people would just about died waiting for the mail to come, because it didn't come in 1896 when they said it would. It was sometimes, it was more like 1902, 1905 before the postal mail system started to reach. And why in the world did it take so long? The roads.
Yes.
Roads were terrible. And this is why I stress the point. We have to thank our ancestors tremendously for what they did for us, what they put up with. So now the roads, how do you build a road at that period of time? And so you built the road with a shovel. You built the road with a slip. You built the road with a Fresno. So back up onto that, and we all pretty much know what a shovel is, but then what is a slip? Well, you had a lot of the farmhouses, the farm people, I should say, had the slips in there, and it was used to haul manure out of the barn, hooked onto a horse, and would pull that out. It looks like a grain shovel. scoop shovel. Is what it looked like, and it just slid along the ground. The handles, it would lift up and it would dig down deeper. You slip down and it would slide more. And this was a slip. So that was how our first roads were built. That's how we put the dirt back up to the bridge that kept washing away. So then from this, a fabulous invention took place in California. The Fresno come along. It was a slip with wheels on it. That was all that was changed. They put wheels on the outside edges of it, and again, it was pulled by the horses or mules. By the way, the oxen is pretty much given up at this point in time.
So by about 18 or 1900, we didn't have many oxen.
We had them, we just didn't call them oxen anymore. They were just a steer out in the pasture.
Sure.
Because there was no real difference there.
That's right, yeah. But you said like originally maybe 25 to 40 years ago, we didn't eat beef.
The 1870 period of time and before, we did not really eat beef.
So it wasn't, yeah.
We had no refrigeration systems to help preserve it. It didn't store well like that, like salt pork would. And so now,
sorry, yeah.
no, you're all right there. So we're back to the horses and a mule now to pull these slips, these Fresnos, like that. So then the county has got the designated roads, and the people in the county actually had to put up funds to help start the new roads. And they would turn around and fund this to the county, some of this monies, to try to stimulate this road maybe that was going to go past their place. Now then it gets into a cultural type of thing that's taking place, because the government wants the states to take care of roads. The federal government wants the states to take care of it. The state wants the counties to take care of the roads and build the roads. And the people did not want to be taxed heavily because they were afraid they would go back to the system of being slaves for the federal government, one way or another, or even to the state government. So there was a tremendous resistance by the people, and the farmers were carrying this burden the heaviest. They had the most roads to be built, and so the people in the county, or excuse me, in the government of the county, they would look at the farmer all the time, expecting him to come up with the road, the repairs that was necessary this way. So it was a stalemate. So 1896 will come up to, and what happens but a bicycle is now being used for exercise, the fun and taking place there with the bicycle. But the bicycle, the first one, had a very large wheel on it on the front, and a very small wheel at the rear, and they were very dangerous. We would call that front wheel drive. They pedaled on the front wheel. So this come up to the period of time up here into the 90s, the 1890s, and the two-wheel bicycle with two wheels the same size was developed, had a sprocket and pedals, and you would steer it like you kind of would expect to, and so that became very popular. That was rear wheel drive. You know, these bicycles and the enthusiasm really took off, and the people wanted to be a part of the roads system, but the roads were so bad. So if you would take and read your old newspapers, and I'm going to suggest go to your local museum, your local library, your local library, and you read the old newspapers, and you go to 1896, and you will find that the people rode clear out of town on a bicycle and got back that same day. But they couldn't go any further because of the road conditions. It was terrible road conditions. And I'm going to comment on this book here that I brought with me this evening. It's Nebraska History by the Nebraska State Historical Society. It is volume 96 and number 4. It was in the winter of 2015. On the front of this are the ladies that are on the bicycles, and this is what's promoting good roads, and so they started the Good Roads Association. And from this, there became a lot of attention to the quality of our roads, and they hadn't improved any. We were still with the same problems. They were nothing but, at best, just a dirt road. Might have been drug a little bit, because we're coming up to another date and time that I want to bring to your one of the famous pictures is right here, Brewster, Nebraska, and it is showing then the condition of our roads. It's nothing more than 2 ruts at the best that there was. And so when it rained, everything was determined on the weather, on the condition of how your roads were. If it rained, it was going to be so muddy, you probably weren't going to go anywhere. You weren't going to be riding a bicycle, that was for sure.
I can remember, like in the 50s when I went to rural school, all the roads weren't gravelled and maintained. If it was really, really muddy, you'd stay home.
Absolutely, and you bring up the good point, because that didn't come for quite a little while yet, the gravel. Yeah. But we haven't got the road built yet. So there was tremendous amount of roads that they promoted and never built. Then there was the roads that were built and nobody would travel on because it was easier to go across the grass area.
I was just going to say, wasn't there a little resistance to?
It was just a
common sense to it.
Common sense, ordinary resistance. My gosh, I'm just going over this way instead of following this this road here. And the road that we're talking about that was used then in dry weather was dust. And so it was a terrible amount of dust kicked up by the horses here that you're following. So you got a tremendous amount. So then, boy, thank goodness for the rain. Oops, we got mud. And the mud was really severe because there was no gravel on these.
No bottom.
Yeah. The streams that you came up to, for the most part, was still, you forded the stream. And to ford the stream meant you drove into it in good luck. And so this is the thing that we're working with on the roads. And so then you would say, well, okay, we're going to build a road, and we need to pay for this road, and the county's beginning to, well, I suppose we'll have to pay for some of this. And so you would petition for a road. The county would okay the petition or not. If they went ahead and built the road there, well, who did they charge it to? Because you had areas where there was a school, and so that was a school road. You had township roads. You had various, and it made it complicated for the county commissioners as to how you charge this out. And then when you came on up to the bridge, then it became a bridge part of the indebtedness in here. And so all of this had to be broke down. And the county commissioners at this point in time was, in my view, was working hard to try to keep up with this, and the public was pressing very hard to get more and more roads. Then we had the, like I say, the expense problem. We had the wages, and the very first wages were like 25 cents an hour, and if you had a team of horses or mules, it was 35 cents an hour that you would be paid to work for the county. And this started an expense then that had to be controlled by the county. So then the county recognized that other places around the country were beginning to have graders. And by the way, my grandfather patented one of the first graders in 1912. He was up against the Caterpillar Company and some of the other companies for his grader. And a grader at this time, and his, was that you dug the ditch, you pulled the dirt up out of the ditch onto the road and formed a crown, and you did half the road at one way out and half the road on the way back. That's an oversimplification of it, but that's how those early roads were built out here on the prairie. So then they begin to realize, and this is one of the things that those of you that want to do a little more digging into this, that there was a history written by a man by the name of George Coster of would be later, the Nebraska Department of Roads. He wrote it very good, and he wrote it in a way that the individual could understand. But when they got into that they were going to start building roads, they realized right away they needed an engineer. But what kind of an engineer were they going to get? It had to be an irrigation engineer. The engineers that we had were for other things such as buildings and so on, and they didn't know how to work with hydraulics. Now hydraulics is because of the water that is draining off from fields, draining with the ditches that we're going to be building here. All of this gets into the irrigation fact. So
did they decide to build a road higher with a ditch on the side, thinking that the water and the snow would run off of it, or?
They were actually copying over 2,000 years of history. The Romans built the roads, and they set the stipulations of how a road should be built, how wide it should be, how the ditches would carry the water. And so this is what we tried to copy, and we found out it was bigger than we realized. And yes, there was the road that needed to have a crown to it. And it's still very much that way today. The crown was the high center part of the road so that the waters would drain off to the ditch that would be on the side. The ditch was to keep this water from running across the road. Now, anybody of those of my age and whatever that traveled the dirt roads knew that it still crossed the road every once in a while, and we still had problems with the mud and the water because of the ruts we made in the middle of the road. The water run right down those ruts, and if you didn't stay centered on the crown, by the way, if somebody else is coming down the road at the same time in the opposite direction, you got a problem, because somebody's going to have to get over, and you got over on a slick muddy road, and you started sliding to the ditch right now. That's the practical side of what's going on, but that is what happened. And if you look even at today's very best of your highways, the interstate at all, still have a crown, but it is not as large. And if you'll watch, the ditches oftentimes now are very wide to try to slow up this water. Okay? So these are the things that the practical side of what is trying to take place here. I want to bring up the point here, since we kind of got into it here with the ditches and the water situation, is that in those days there was no conservation as we know today. Didn't even think of that, did we?
Right.
No, we don't give credit to conservation. Conservation turns around and we've put in ponds, we've put in waterways, and all of these things we've turned around and rerouted sometimes streams to control the waters so that it wasn't tearing out all the bridges. The early day bridges that the county built, many times they no more got it built than it washed out. Spring was flood time for all of us who was around with that, and boy, you lost the bridge. And it's downstream somewhere. The last I saw it, it was downstream. And so the county was having to rebuild bridges. The county was busy, by the way, of putting in wooden bridges. You have more than one style of bridge. You have the steel, or as they call it in the very first early days, it was iron. And they talked about the iron bridges. So the county designed, you set up that it would be a cost. They wanted to stay within a cost of a bridge if it was steel of so much a foot if it was within a certain span. Wooden bridges couldn't span as far, and they had a different valuation of per foot that they would pay. And there were people, businesses that would come in and compete for these roads and bridges.
This brings into mind, you showed us one time, like at Milford, there was the natural ford, and then there was the Indian, the Native American ford, then there was the wooden bridge, and then there was the new iron bridge. And when I read Cox's way early in Seward County's history, Milford had been a natural, they were industrious, and they got it. And then so Cox and I believe Gale and another, they were going to build a bridge right up here in Seward on the Blue River, up here too. Mm-hmm. And they worked so hard, and they were working like a chamber of commerce, telling everybody to come through Seward then. But they got that bridge, and it just about did them in to build that bridge. And because our banks were so steep, and it was so hard to span it, and then I believe it got washed out, and so they thought they wouldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is more than one instance that the bridge was built and fell over on its side before they got to use it. And they found out right away that they didn't know how to build roads, they didn't know how to build bridges, and they had to turn around and go to other people. The King patent was the biggest early bridge design, and it was a design that was built over strictly wood that self-supported itself in a sense. We don't need to go into how that design worked, but it was a very well accepted design that it spread its weight onto other portions of the bridge, and you could have a span that would hold up better. So the King and the iron bridge that you're talking about at Milford, that was a King bridge, but that was not strictly a straight bridge of that style. It was of a style that they called the bowstring bridge. And so the bowstring bridge, you could pretty well tell it when you first saw it because it was just like the bow with the string stretched tight and like that for each span. So that was that type. Later, after that, came the truss type bridges that was built. Now, a truss is more of an engineering terminology that was used, but it was one that could be constructed on and needed to be able to be constructed on site. And so that was it. It was economically correct, and through the change of the design, they could go from to larger span on that. So the truss came later. The trusses came shortly after 1900. Actually the King patent was approximately 1820. That patent, so it was an old patent, and it had been used in the East, and it was very favorable along the with the wooden bridges. But the steel, they changed to the steel bridge from the iron bridge. Iron was a product that had been invented to use and was through the 1800s was used an awful lot. But by the 1900s, they had learned to make a cheaper product that was steel. Steel before that, in the 1800s, was very expensive. So then the steel was more practical.
And steel, the difference between iron and steel?
Is a chemical makeup.
Yeah.
I'll let you look that one up.
All righty.
That is, yes.
Okay.
The problem was with iron, iron is very brittle, unless it's just treated perfectly right. And so you couldn't modify it at all, or you were going to break it. Steel is more malleable, and it bends. And so with the right construction, it outdid the iron. So that was the part was taken, these changes was taking place. But times are beginning to change now. We've went from the bicycle, we begin to build the roads, the bridges, and what comes next?
Well, didn't they Model T or Model A?
Okay, the automobile began to
Yes.
show its head just before the turn of the century, 1900, not the 20.
Yeah.
Okay. So with the automobile beginning to show up,
I forgot that it came right at night, around in there that early.
and the bicycle was losing interest. So it assisted, the bicycle did a tremendous amount of good in assisting our roads, but it began to fade out and lose its enthusiasm. But the automobile came, there was a very small amount of automobiles showed up, mostly just people tinkering, just before 1900. But by 1905, there was beginning to be businesses of building automobiles. And everybody that had been a blacksmith thought that they could build an automobile. And they were having to fix the change here because they were having to now fix an automobile where before they had been fixing a wagon. The wagons were wooden. And now the automobile is not wooden. It is mostly built with steel. It was built with a drop forge in many of its parts. It was an exciting time and an exciting thing that was taking place. Now the laws had to change also. You know, we forget about all the small little details that go along with change. But the laws had, the earlier laws was you couldn't drive a wagon across the bridge. Now this would be with horses. You couldn't drive across the bridge except for at a walking pace, because the young guys would like to go out there and race across the bridge and the planks would just fly. And you could hear it all over the county as the planks would fly. Planks were not fastened down at that on a bridge. And so this would be a law for that period of time. So then we come along with the automobile, and what happens is it scares the horses, and the horse takes off and runs away. Somebody gets hurt, all kinds of things like that. So we have the problem with that. So then the law said we have to have a man go out with a flag so many feet ahead of the automobile, waving the flag, tell them that there's an automobile coming through town now. And so these were actual laws that were on the books, type of thing. We laugh at them today, but it probably wasn't too funny if you had the horse and the buggy that run away. So these were some of the changes. Now then that we're getting the automobile on the road, we still need to do something with this road. Okay, so we've turned around and come up with a drag. A drag was made from a punch-on. Of course, you know what a punch-on is.
No.
You don't?
No.
Oh. Well, the punch-on is when you take a log and split it in half. It pops open like that, and it's got a flat side on each side here, and the bark on the bottom of the side of the other side. So that's the punch-on. Okay, the punch-on then has been used for centuries, because that's what when you made a bench at your table in the log cabin,
yes.
it was a punch-on. When you turn around and put floors in your cabin instead of the dirt floor, you put punch-ons down with the flat side up. Those were punch-ons. So now with the punch-ons, they turn around and turn them up on edge, hooked together with hooked together with timbers in between, and chains hooked then so that for the horses to drag, and there would be one strip of metal put on the one punch-on the log over there. And of course, as this got to going, they got to dressing up and coming up with better logs to use and that sort of thing as time went on. But this thing cost $179, which was a pretty good chunk of change for a farmer to have out there. But the farmer was expected then to use this and drag, it was his road, wasn't it?
So he had it.
So he was expected to drag his road out here with this drag. Now, it was set at an angle, so it had a tendency, with the steel at one, on the front leading edge of one, it would have a tendency then to drag the dirt up to the one at the opposite end.
Okay.
Okay, and so it was a way of controlling it a little bit. And so then if you read your newspapers of the old day, of this time, you will see that they were promoting everybody should be using a drag out there on your roads. And if you helped drag the road there, that helped me. And if I helped drag the road here, it helped the next person, and so on. And so that's how we'd have a road across the countryside, wouldn't we?
That's how they would maintain the roads. Hence the maintainer, huh?
Yes. Okay. Okay, then we turned around with the roads. We started to bring in we had the grader, then we had to change, and they went to the steam traction engine to pull the grader. The steam traction engine was huge and took a large manpower, usually at least minimum of 4 to maintain it. And then the gas engine came along, and then 2 men could all of a sudden start doing what 4 men
About
were
what year
doing.
did the gas engine?
The gas engine come in by 1912.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, 1912. I've got postcards where my grandfather that had the grader, and he said the future is going to be the gasoline engine over the steam. And so now then we needed to get, we got the roads formed, we got them with drags on those, and then we started to, we needed to hire people to haul gravel in and put on the roads. Yes.
Well, I was just gonna say, where'd they get the gravel? Who thought of that? Yeah.
Okay, another, well, it had been known for a long time, the gravel would, but who's gonna pay for it, you know? It's the old problems. At one point in time, Nebraska looked at their roads evaluation type of thing, and they had, I think the figure was close to 80,000 miles of roads in the whole state. Now that sounds like quite a little bit. There was only 179 miles gravelled. Okay.
Well, and one other thing too that you have to kind of keep in mind was the source of the gravel, how close, I mean, and they had, and I don't know that much about the gravel pits.
No, you're absolutely right.
But if there wasn't any gravel close, that would make it more expensive to get the gravel.
It was, and how do you spread out the expense?
Yeah.
On this, you know, like I said the other day, you had the grader over here, and you're grading in the south down here at Camden, and Seward says, well, why can't they be up here grading up here? We only got the one grader, but it ought to be up here. There's more people now up here. That sort of thing. So it hasn't changed at all. And the other thing is the gravel that are coming in, and by the way, those people that hauled the gravel in were largely from Lancaster County, as they brought the gravel into the county.
Were there any gravel pits in Seward County?
You know, I didn't dig into it that far to know.
I mean, that was just curious.
But you just look at the records and who
Yeah.
they were paying, and they were paying the people mostly of Lancaster County on there, but they did then have to bring in that. So we'll jump quick like, because I know time's getting short. Since we've been into the 1912 period of time, we've got automobiles on the road, and we got the farmer. He's happier because he's got roads out there in front of his place. And see, the big point was for the farmer was when his hogs were ready to go to market and it was raining, he couldn't get them to the railroad. And so then by the time he could get them to the railroad, the price had went down. So he lost money, the state had lost money, this sort of thing. So we're having a change. By the way, the economy has, we went, if you check the records, whatever, where they've been paying out anything from a few dollars to $100 a month for road maintenance and what have you. Now they're paying out thousands of dollars a month for maintenance on the roads. All of this is changing. Okay, then comes along the period of time of 1914 to 1918. So what do we have happen then? World War I. World War I. And so the federal government says, we're going to control the railroads entirely. Now, you can't ship your cattle, you can't ship your hogs now, because we're shipping ammunition, we're shipping guns, we're shipping this, that, troops, and so on. And so the federal government was in charge. And so then, this is when we become to the very first realization, whoa, we've got a real severe problem of roads here. And that was a very major problem at that time. So then we got through the World War I, and in this situation, the military, knowing that this roads thing was a problem, that they couldn't, they needed the farmers to do well too. So they would come out here across this part of the country checking this out. And one of those men that was there was an officer by the name of Dwight David Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, he was in this group surveying the roads, and so then after World War II, or during World War II I should say, he saw the Autobahn highway in Germany. So then when he came back, he was the one that saw to it for the 1955 signing of the interstate highway system. So everything is relative to, and I went through this pretty fast, and there's lots of little details.
Before the interstate highway system, then we did have, what prompted building Highway 6, Highway 34?
Okay, you back up to
And
a
Lincoln
period
Highway.
of time
Let's
of
step back in there,
1916, and the federal government was knowing that they were going to have to start funding here to help the states, to help the states and to help the whole nation by helping the states. So they were beginning to realize that they just didn't know how to do it yet. It came up as early as like 1912, several times in Congress, but they couldn't get it through. Doesn't that sound normal? They couldn't get it through Congress there. But then finally they decided they had to do something. And so we came up with the federal highway aid systems. And what happened very fast then, was that with that kind of funding, all of a sudden we could have a highway from Lincoln, Nebraska to Seward, which would later be 34 highway. But there was 3 highways that were listed as highways, not roads. 3 highways in the state of Nebraska at this time.
At what time? At what year?
This would have been 1914, I believe.
Wow.
There was 3 highways. One of them, you would know, was the Lincoln Highway. And now parts and pieces of that you got to be careful of, because if parts and pieces was later was Highway 30, and so this is a kind of a touchy area. But it was the Lincoln Highway. The other one was the Meridian Highway, and I lived on the Meridian Highway. And so that was the one that went north-south. It went all the way from Canada then to Mexico. So it was a major highway. And then there was the old highway.
Which was?
OLD. The OLD is Omaha, Lincoln, and Denver. And that's what they called it at that time. Then it became the DLD. And this happens because of the year about 1913. Like I say, these things are coming fast now.
It is. Things really
There was dealerships that were interested in the automobile. Now we're interested in the highway to promote their automobile. And so Detroit, Lincoln, and Denver.
And then
DLD.
I know we're running out of time, and this is just so wonderful. And we'll catch these 2 little points, and then we have to close. But where did they buy their gas? And there were no filling stations. Where'd they go to the restroom?
I'm not going to tell you where they went to the restroom. Yes, no, these were problems. The infrastructure was not there. It flat was not there.
But it was prompted by World War I, when the leaders of our nation, it finally was brought home. They realized the importance of the transportation.
Even more so, it began to show in 1912. See, nothing happens on one date, except for the 4th of July.
That's right.
You know, when you're doing something like this, and you've got laws and money and that sort of thing, it begins and it transcends over a period of time to where that you claim it then at that. So 1912 saw some of these big changes onto there. There was the Hubinger highway map showed up. It was one of the very first maps that there was, because before, with somebody that tried to cross the country, there were no maps to follow.
It never, yeah. You had said that before, no maps, and then
There were no restroom
gas,
facility, and gasoline was purchased in some cases, and it was variable, at a hardware store, a drug store, whoever carried the gasoline in a can. And as I had mentioned before, the blacksmiths become mechanics in many cases under there. And tire repair was just a constant thing. By the way, they were tubeless tires. Dunlop had invented the first tire with air in it to inflate it.
And were they truly rubber?
They were rubber. They were the true rubber,
Which
more
is
than today.
involved another economy. So.
Yeah, it did, and that was a full foreign. In other words, we're in an international economy.
We just have to close, but this is just, we could do another one, couldn't we?
Well, we'll hope somebody wants to step up and do the next one.
Any absolute little tidbits here we forgot, do you think?
Oh, probably about 1,000.
Okay.
Let that go to another time.
Oh, Jerry, thank you, thank you. This story is so important, and it's so important that the next generations understand. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.